Thank you, Kayla. Good morning and welcome to day 4 with Marianne McKibben Dana here at Lakeside. And the weather is really cooperating today, and it's a beautiful day. So I hope you all enjoy the whole day here at Lakeside. I have a few things to mention in the way of announcements. First of all, if you're going to be here next week, our preacher is the Reverend Dr. Jim Wallace. His book is over at the Fine Print, The False White Gospel, and he'll be with us all week. And on Wednesday, his wife, Joy Carol Wallace, who is an ordained Episcopal priest in the Church of England, will be sharing her story. And that is on Wednesday morning, and Jim will be with us on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, and also then, of course, on Sunday morning. Next week, we have a seminar, Christian Biographies. Dan Moulton will be sharing the story of Jerome, who translated the Bible into Latin, on Monday from 3 to 4:30 at the train station. And on Wednesday, William Tyndale, who translated the Bible into English, from also 3 to 4:30 p.m. at the train station. And if you've been in Dan's seminars before, you know that he does a marvelous job of weaving the historical, the theological, and always has humor in his presentations as well, because all these people, he's found humorous things about all these people that we learn about. So that's next week. And then the week following is Exploring Epiphany, the Art of Poem Making with John Fox, who is a certified poetic therapist. And this is a joint pillar with our wellness pillar, our recreation and wellness, and it will be held at Orchestra Hall on Wednesday and Thursday. And we do need you to register for that ahead of time, and there are scholarships available. If you're interested in a scholarship for you or for somebody else, please see me personally or email me about that. And I want to remind you that recordings are available of all of these sessions, and there's a form for that on the table in the back. We're so pleased to have Reverend Marianne McKibben Dana with us this week. I said to my wife at breakfast, I can't believe we're already saying goodbye. It seems like she just got here. The week has certainly gone fast, and I want to give her as much time as possible. So at this time, would you welcome back to talk about hope, Marianne McKibben Dana.
Thank you. It has gone fast. Wow. Is Lakeside time always like that? That you just, like that, I'm on the down of the roller coaster, like Charlie said. Whew. My stuff's packed up in the rent car. I'm getting in the car almost right after this. Very sad. But good. Will be good to be home. I think of all of the verses, we have plenty in Scripture that speak to us of hope, and this is probably of our secular scriptures. These are the verses that are invoked the most when we think about hope in terms of poetic expressions of that. And I invite us in our poetry moment here as I read this, let's treat this like a Lectio Divina, if you know that practice of Scripture where you just listen and you let a word or a phrase just shimmer for you that just calls out to you. You may not even know why. The Holy Spirit is giving you that. Listen for a word or phrase from this passage that speaks to you as we think about hope. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. I invite you, as you feel led, simply to call out your word or phrase. I'll repeat it so we have it on the microphone, but let's listen for the poem within the poem that the Holy Spirit is giving to our hearts this morning. What did you hear? What called out to you? Never. tune. Perches in the soul. So there's a sense of Christ, the solid rock I stand, right? My hope is built on nothing less. That bird doesn't just flutter, but I love that. What else did you hear or sense in this? Yes? Feathers. Feathers. Yeah. Lovely. For me, this time it was without the words. I think about the Spirit that intercedes for us in sighs too deep for words. And all the words we've shared this week about hope. Sometimes hope is just presence. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Any other words or phrases that spoke to you? All right. Well, there's another poem that I'm not going to read, but I invite you, if you'd like a slightly different twist on hope in a poem, there's a response to this poem. Caitlin Seda, I think her name is, but she writes, "Hope is a sewer rat." And I won't read it here. It has a little bit of colorful language in it, but the idea is it's a little bit of a kind of response, Minority Report to Emily Dickinson that lifts up this very gentle yet persistent view of this bird that just keeps singing. And Caitlin Seda says, hope is the sewer rat that just survives, even in the most abject conditions. And so I commend that to you as well. If you need a hope that's a little gritty, that's a little just will not give up in that kind of dogged way. I live near the D.C. area, and any big city where you've got, New York is even worse, but, rats are a problem. They get into the trash, and they are so dang persistent. And I like the idea, even though it's not as nice and picturesque as a bird. Sometimes we need a little sewer rat kind of hope. So we have covered a lot of ground this week. We started out in our kind of hope all the way down, thinking theologically, thinking scripturally, looking at some different views of how we understand hope in our tradition, how different cultures, different generations, different racial ethnic groups may think about hope, and how much our ideas of hope are bound up in culture. And we also looked into thinking about hope and how hope lives in the stories that give our lives meaning. And as Christians, how do we understand the Christian story as a bearer of hope, the story of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection as a story that speaks to hope, that feeds us that hope that we need. And yesterday we talked about hope as an embodied phenomenon, not just something we think about or we need to feel kind of hopeful in our brains, our hearts, our emotions, our psyches, but hope is something that lives in our bodies. And so today we're going to build on that, and I want to just give you some practices, and during our discussion time, you might lift some up too. We did talk about some yesterday. You all talked about listening to jazz and prayer and Bible study and all of these things, and I want to add a few more. But to kind of put a button on yesterday, I was talking about how so much of our culture, our news culture, seems tailor-made to keep us in a state of distrust, of anxiety, of fear, and how do we help one another provide an antidote to that? And one of the things that I do is I'm trying to find sources for news that lift up the stories that we don't often hear. And during our discussion time, if you have some that you recommend, I want you to share those with your friends here. But the musician David Byrne, who is from the Talking Heads, one of his post-Talking Heads project is this site called Reasons to be Cheerful. And it's just a source of kind of good news and people trying to make the world better in their own ways. And this was a recent story. This is called, this is a little mini forest. It's called the Miyawaki method of reforestation. And what they're doing is they're taking these little tiny strips of land, like in medians of roads and the little roundabouts. And the idea is to plant native trees in a very dense and layered kind of manner. And what's amazing about 3 per square meter, so just really dense forestation, and what they're trying to do is recreate the kind of fertile conditions of the primitive forests that once covered the planet. But they're doing it in these little pocket-sized places. And we often think about reforestation as this long, decades-long process. But what's interesting about this Miyawaki forest is that it can grow 1 meter a year and reach maturity in 15 to 20 years. So these little pocket-sized forests can be planted in all kinds of ways. And I think this is a fascinating story about people who are trying to kind of make the world better, more beautiful, more flourishing. But also it feels like a parable for how we cultivate and practice hope. Is, there's an activist author and theologian in Atlanta named Gregory Ellison, and he remembers that his aunt, when he was young, would say, "Greg, I can't change the world, but I can change the 3 feet around me," right? And that's what I see expressed here. And so that's what today is about, is hopefully we'll all leave this session committed to being bearers of hope in our own little 3 feet around us, or, pocket-sized forests. This one just came in yesterday from the same site, and I think it really speaks to our conversation yesterday. In the French city here, they are providing what's called museotherapy. And it's people who have various health conditions, maybe mental health conditions. They're prescribing museum. Go to the museum, immerse yourself in awe, in wonder, in beauty. And they're seeing that has a therapeutic effect. So you all here in this place, this is more than a vacation. I mean, for those of you who are vacationing here, this is maybe not museotherapy, but beauty therapy. It's awe. It's immersing in a different way of being. I've been taking pictures every time I'm out on a run or a walk. There's just, the flowers are incredible, the view on the lake, the sparkling on the water. That is changing our physiologies so that we can go back out into the world that maybe doesn't have that same kind of beauty. We have to look for it a little more. So we're talking today about active hope. And sorry for this huge wall of text, but someone sent me this just this week. I hadn't seen this before. But Joanna Macy has worked for many decades with groups that are working around environmental issues, and she has written a lot because what she saw is that population in particular really, really fell prey to despair, discouragement, because the problems seem so vast, and those little pocket forests maybe don't feel like they're making a big difference. So she writes about active hope. Active hope is a practice, she says, like Tai Chi or gardening. It is something we do rather than have. It is a process we can apply to any situation, and it involves 3 key steps. First, we take a clear view of reality, which may be the hardest thing, right? To just really say, this is the world as it is, as best I can understand it. Second, we identify what we hope for in terms of the direction we'd like things to move in, or the values. Now, this is really interesting, right? I think about our conversation on Tuesday about story, right? And remember, we closed with Hope Punk, this idea that there's a kindness and a gentleness that is a way of moving forward, even if our ultimate efforts are not successful, that there are things worth fighting for, even though the outcome may not be what we wish. So what are the values that we want to express in our lives? And then third, we take steps to move ourselves and our situation in that direction. Now, this is a non-faith-based resource, we would be remiss if we did not acknowledge that we do our work through the equipping work of the Holy Spirit in Christ. But since active hope doesn't require our optimism, and remember we said on Monday that we felt like I quoted Rabbi Sachs, who said, the Hebrew Bible is not an optimistic book, but it's a hopeful book. And I think the Christian scriptures have a lot of that as well. It's hopeful. So we need optimism for this work. We can apply it even in areas where we may feel hopeless. The guiding impetus is intention. We choose what we aim to bring about, act for, or express. Rather than weighing our chances and proceeding only when we feel hopeful, we focus on our intention and let it be our guide. So in this next little piece, I'm going to give you, as I said, there's a section of the book that's called The Practice of Hope, and it has a few of these, and some of these are things that aren't in the book, but a few of my favorites that come out. As I said, I do coaching for church leaders and others, and there are some consistent themes that come up as we think about how do we exercise Christian leadership in this world? What does that look like? There is so much that threatens to kind of knock us off into trivialities, things that don't matter, that kind of impetus to feel fearful and discouraged. That may be there for all of you or for some of you. I recently, I live in Reston, Virginia, and we're on this little tiny lake, kind of man-made lake, and so I've been taking up paddleboarding. And when I first learned about paddleboarding, I would see people on the paddleboard, and you see their silhouettes, like this person, and they just look like they're gliding along. Anybody paddleboard in here? They just look so elegant, don't they? And then when I got on the paddleboard, I was like wobbling. And we got one of those really big ones that you're supposed to be able to do yoga on. I mean, it's very wide. I can't imagine doing yoga on it. But I just kind of plant my feet and I wobble. And what I finally realized is that the paddleboard is very stable. I mean, it's wide enough that it would take a lot for it to tump over. I'm the one that's wobbly, but the paddleboard is stable. And so one of the practices of hope that we can cultivate is figuring out what in our lives is stable, that we can count on. For us, that may be our faith. For others, it may be Martin Luther King's arc of the moral universe that bends towards justice, right? Whatever that is that feels stable. And I remember hearing years ago from a rabbi that the earliest name for God, Elohim is one of the most common in early Judaism, but even before that, one of the earliest names for God is Ha-Makom in Hebrew, which means the place. So I want to commend that practice to you of just grounding in God and not worrying that we feel wobbly, but that God, the ground of our being, as Paul Tillich put it, God is the place. And that place is beautiful, reliable, full of love, full of grace. And that's just, where do you stand? Where do you place your feet when the world feels so wobbly? So that's a practice that I want to commend to you. I write about it in the book called The Practice of Finding What's Stable. And there's a lot in our world that feels very unsettled at the moment, but there are also things we can count on. So what can you count on? And just think about what that is for you. And when you're feeling wobbly, how do you get back to that grounding? I have not fallen in yet from the paddleboard. The paddleboard is that stable. Very, very glad to report. Here's another practice to commend to you. This is a good one for when you're feeling overwhelmed. I heard an interview some years ago. Anybody in here seen Hamilton, the show? Yeah, a lot of us have. I heard an interview with Thomas Kail and Lin-Manuel Miranda, who are the geniuses behind the musical Hamilton. And they were talking about the tremendous project of putting this musical together, just the sheer number of words in that musical is daunting. But then you have the music, the performance, the costumes, the dancing, choreography, everything. And there was a time when they were really stuck in the morass of putting that together, and they thought, there is no way we're going to be able, this is all going to come together. And one of them remembered that, I think it was Fiddler on the Roof, the first initial production of that was in a similar place. And one of the, I think it was Austin Pendleton went to Jerome Robbins and was like, what? May have been Guys and Dolls, I don't know, I don't remember. One of those classic musicals. And said, what are we going to do? I mean, it was just really going, have you been in those situations where, I mean, I can't tell you how many session meetings I've been in with the church that I serve or previous churches, and we're just, I don't know, we're just walking in circles here, right? And the project seems so big. The work seems so beyond us. And so Jerome Robbins said, we are going to do 10 things a day. And so Lin-Manuel Miranda and Thomas Cale took that as their mission. We are just going to do 10 things. And when the 10 things are done, we're done for the day. And you can pick whatever number you want. But I want to suggest that that is a way of building hope, is just saying, here is what we're going to do, and then we're going to, for us we might say, let go and let God, right? Bless it and say that is enough. So I want to suggest the practice of 10 things. If you're feeling stuck or overwhelmed, just figure out that little, and it doesn't have to be 10, it can be 5, it can be 3. But just when you're done for the day, you're done. And give it up to God. The next one I want to share, let me look at my, let me set it up with a story. I was in a coffee shop on a Saturday morning. I was getting ready to meet with my publisher. This was a few years ago. And I was running a little late, but I had enough time to come in, get some tea, and make it to my meeting. And there was someone in front of me in line, a youngish guy wearing a suit, Saturday morning. That seemed a little weird. And he was placing an order for like 10 people. And all 10 of them wanted something different, you know, half calf, double, extra hot, blah, blah, blah. And I was running late. I was probably in a little bit of, like, my lid wasn't completely flipped, but I was a little like he was talking yesterday, Dan Siegel, about kind of like this. And I started to get really irritated. I'm like, why do we all need our little special snowflake coffee drinks, right? Why can't we all just get coffee? And just started telling myself this story about our narcissistic age where we all have to have it our own way. And this guy is impeding me from getting to my place on time. And I don't know, it was God. It was a God thing, because all of a sudden I started to ask myself, why would he be wearing a suit on a Saturday morning? And I was like, let's pass the time, if nothing else, while they're making all of these, you know, extra whip, whatever. And I thought, well, maybe he has a job interview, but why would he be doing coffee? Maybe he was out all night, and he's like bringing coffee home to his roommates, right? Why was he wearing a suit? Then I decided that he was on his way to a funeral, and he was picking up drinks for the family. And then that kind of special snowflake, blah, 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 kind of attitude completely changed, because I thought maybe this guy is bringing a little bit of care and a little bit of love to people who are having one of the worst days of their lives. And then I was different with that story. I have no idea where he was going, and it wasn't my place to ask him, by any chance, are you on your way to a funeral? No, but I was different. Now, we may have talked about this practice when I was here 5 years ago. I don't know with this exact story or not. I think it happened after that, but that's an improvisation move, is to ask, what else could this be beyond what I think it is? And it turns out that when we do that creative work of what could this be, and who do I want to be in this situation, And what would need to be true for that to be possible? That's a practice of hope. There's a philosopher, he also writes the ethics column for the New York Times, Kwame Anthony Appiah, and he has a book called a book is called As If. But this is a practice that he calls useful fictions. And what we do in these is the world is complex. The world is often full of difficulty and challenge. But what we can do, and I think as people of faith, I think we are called to do this, is to look at it with a different kind of vision. Because what I was doing in that moment, and I don't say this to kind of make myself the hero of the story, I so rarely go to this benevolent explanation that I think God gave to me. I often assume the worst. That's my kind of initial impulse. I'm confessing to you, and you all can tell me in Jesus Christ I am forgiven, right? Okay. But those are the eyes of faith, to say, and what happened when I decided he was on his way to a funeral is I started kind of beaming love towards him. And it doesn't matter where he was going. We all need some love kind of sent our way, don't we? So the idea behind a useful fiction is who do I want to be, and how do I live as if that were the case? When someone cuts me off on the freeway, they could be just a selfish jerk, or they could be going somewhere really important that they need, or they're distracted because their kid is at home sick and they just need to get there as quickly as possible. It doesn't cost me anything to believe that. In fact, it benefits me and I think the universe to say this is possible, and it allows me to live in a more generous and Christ-like, I would say, way. So the practice of writing a useful fiction for yourself that allows you to be the kind of person that God has called you to be, has called all of us to be. One more little practice, and then we'll do something a little different with the remaining time that we have. Anybody remember this book? Are You My Mother? Yes. It's a little bird who is looking for his mother. The book doesn't matter, but it's the image that came to me when I read this story. Some months ago in Texas, there was a rancher who was driving his truck, and he realized to his dismay that he had run over a roadrunner nest and had crushed all of the eggs except for one egg. And he took the egg, kind of cradled it in the warmth of his truck, kind of kept it warm, and drove the 500 miles to his house. And when he got there, he looked up what is the nearest wildlife rehabilitation. It was 160 miles away in Dallas. So he got in his truck again, cradled the egg in warmth, and took it to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. And it's a heartwarming story, the lengths that he would go to for love, right? The sad part of the story is that the roadrunner didn't make it. It hatched. It looked like it was thriving for a few days, but then it did not survive. And what I think this is an example of is there's an Ignatian practice. Many of us know the work of St. Ignatius of Loyola and his spiritual exercises, but he has an exercise, a principle that he calls holy indifference. And the idea behind holy indifference is not that we don't care, but that we remain removed from the outcome. We give the outcome to God. As one of my friends put it, we are engaged without being enmeshed. We are connected without being consumed. And do you see how holy indifference allows him, he could have said, this is probably a lost cause. Sad, but true. But what he did is said, here's what I'm capable of doing. I can drive home with this egg. I can keep it warm. And I can drive the 160 miles. I mean, in Texas, that's nothing, right? That's just the next town over. And then let go. I've done my part, and I can leave the rest to God. And what's amazing about this story, my mother sent it to me, and she said, there are still good people in the world. This was her takeaway. And I said, yes, yes. And the people who were the volunteers there, I want to read a line or two from the article. Although the bird's death saddened the volunteer of the wildlife rehabilitation, she says the campaign to save the bird remains undiminished in her heart. The couple went to extraordinary lengths to save a helpless creature. Their efforts failed, but that wasn't something they or anyone else ultimately had power over. Holy indifference, I think, is what allows us to do what's ours to do and then to let go. And this is a really hard practice for many of us. We are, many of us, super, super capable. I'm really competent in a lot of things. And so holy indifference is a challenge for me because I want to hold on to the whole thing from the beginning to all the way to the outcome. But we know that God holds those outcomes. So holy indifference is what allows us to let go. And I think is a way for us to live in hope because we've done what we can and we trust and we let go. She says, they named the Roadrunner Miles, which I guess makes sense, right? All those miles to try to save his life. Says, no one has told the couple that Miles died, Paula Hagen said. She said if she were the one to make that phone call, she'd thank the husband and wife for their kindness, that it's people like them who make a difference in the world. She says, I really believe that, and so do I. So those are just hang on. There we go. Those are just a few little quick, I call them kind of infusion points of hope. We shared another one yesterday, beauty, relationships, action. I think when we're feeling a lack of hope, we need simple little infusions, and I hope that some of those will help you. I want to offer just a couple more things in closing. A couple of you have asked, what are you working on now? If you haven't seen me around too much, it's because I've been using this week also as some writing time. I'm still working on the elevator pitch for the book. It's still one of those ideas. It's kind of all the way out here. Let me start with a story. As I was researching the Hope book, I ran across a story about a Cambodian farmer who worked in the rice paddies in Cambodia. And one day he walked on an unexploded landmine and lost his leg. He was outfitted with a prosthetic leg and went back to the rice paddy but began to experience pain. I guess standing in water when you have a prosthetic, that just causes a lot of pain for him. He was really struggling with a lot of physical pain and began to be depressed. He also had been through a trauma in that place where he had worked and having to go back to that workplace. And so at this time, there were Western kind of mental health professionals who were consulting in Cambodia and working with the mental health people there. And they came in and were talking to him, the other mental health folks, about this case. And they said, well, we would prescribe an antidepressant just to kind of help him get back to baseline so then he can kind of figure things out and maybe move forward. And the Cambodian doctor says, oh, no, we don't need to do that. What we did is we talked to the man, we heard about his story, we tried to understand the nature of his discomfort, his depression, and we asked him, what about dairy farming? And he was open to the idea. And so we bought him a cow, and we taught him, he learned how to dairy farm, and after a few months, his depression was gone completely. And that was a really important story for our family to hear as we were going through this challenge with our kids and their mental health, because it made us ask ourselves, what are we helping our kid get healed for? Do we just give her enough therapy, enough medication so she goes back to the big, huge school that she found very overwhelming and very kind of pressured? And I mean, the school that our kids go to is a wonderful school, but it may not have fit. It may have been a rice paddy, and maybe we need to find our kid a cow. And so it was one of the things that helped us make the decision to move our kids to a different kind of school at which they're all thriving. So the question that I'm asking myself as I write is, we've talked about this teen mental health crisis, and I'm beginning to wonder whether they aren't trying to tell us something about the world that we live in. Are they kind of canaries in the coal mine showing us that a lot of the ways that we live and the expectations we place on ourselves and on one another are not healthy? It's spiritual writer Jiddu Krishnamurti who says, "It is no sign of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick system." So what I'm writing about right now is, what are the ways that our world is not set up for human flourishing? And how can we shift that culture? And one of the ways that that culture works upon us is by upholding a standard of what we consider normal. It's normal for my kid to go to the big high school, to achieve all that they can. These are the expectations that we place on one another, to be a certain way, to conform in certain ways. And when people don't fit those, we ask them to fit, rather than saying, what is going on in our world, and how can we expand what it even means to be normal, or throw out the idea of what normal even is? Is my kid somehow deficient? Or is there something in the water, something in the air? And it could be a little, I mean, my kid's not deficient, my kid has an illness, but what are we to learn? And what can we, as people who are out in the world building culture in the ways we talk to one another, in the kinds of stories that we tell, in the ways that we experience life, how can we expand so that all can find a place? So that we aren't just fixing people up so they can go back to their rice paddy, but say, there may be another life for you that's even better. It just doesn't fit the mold of what we expected when we went into this. So the book is called No More Normal. It's the provisional title of it. But what I'm wanting to explore is some values that kind of uphold the idea of that there is a normal, and then there are people who are outside the norm. And I want to put away those values and lift up an alternative set of values. So, for example, the first chapter is certainty. We want life to make sense. We want there to be things that we can count on, that those certainties that we can ground on. And sometimes those certainties can keep us stuck, can keep us from seeing beyond our own bubbles, our own kind of polarized places. And so the alternative to that is curiosity. That's the alternate value that I want to lift up. And there's 6 of them that I've been writing about. So that's where the hope work has taken me next. I had the realization that as a parent, and I hope this is, I mean, I know not everyone in here is a parent, or maybe you've raised your kids and you're in a different phase of your life, but I think it's true for all of us who will leave a legacy on this world, whether we like it or not. I know that my job as a parent has been to prepare my kids for the world. And I'm realizing also that our work is to prepare the world for our kids. And this generation that's coming up is so abundantly creative, sensitive, artistic. They can be aggravating sometimes, but they are also full of potential that I hope that we don't squash by asking them to be and to fit into the views of normal that we have been living under for so long. I think there is potential for the world to be radically different. And so that's where the book is going. So I want to stop. Actually, I want to do one more thing, and then we're going to have a little conversation. This is, you know what? I changed my mind. We're going to have conversation now, and then I'm going to do a little reading, a little story time with you, and then we'll have our closing. So let's go ahead and get our microphones going. While they're going around, another aspect of this kind of looking at normal and not normal is all around the issue of neurodivergence. A lot more people are being diagnosed with ADHD and other kind of learning differences. And I think we're at a moment now where we can look at that not as simply, here's the way the world works, you're outside of this, you need to figure out how to operate in this world. But we can also do things as a culture that allow for greater hospitality for people who experience the world differently. A very small example of this, our worship service is pretty traditional Presbyterian. We sing hymns, we stand, we sit, we listen to a 20-minute sermon. That fits a lot of the ways that many of us, I mean, you've been sitting here for 42 minutes, right? This is the way many of us learn, but it's not the way everyone experiences things. So we've recently, and again, this is small, but we have a little basket of fidgets in the entrance to our worship service. And they're silent. They're not, I mean, they're little things that you can play with. Many of us, I see a knitter over here, you listen better when you have that going, don't you? I'm the same way. And it has been amazing. We've had young kids and grown-ups say, this is amazing, right? I'm just sitting here and doing something with my hands. I'm more engaged in the service. We had a fifth grader say, I want to come to church every week now because the fidgets are here, right? These little toys that just, and we know that people who process the world differently can enter more deeply into that. And that's just an entry point into how else can we think about our service in a more expansive way to make a place for people who experience the world differently. Anyway, so Emily and Kayla are ready. So Bill's got one down here. If you want to go there first, and then we'll go on from there.
One of these days, this week, somebody talked about the difficulty people my age have accepting change. Change is inevitable, but what you were saying about choosing the way and it's all in your mind, we're afraid of change because it says that the way we were thinking doesn't work anymore.
Right. We do see it as an indictment of ourselves when someone does something differently, if we're not careful. What was wrong with the way it was before? Maybe nothing, but the world is different now. So I do think that you're right, and we can sometimes I can sometimes get judgy with people who are like, but it worked. Like, why do we need to change? Of course. That's understandable. I feel that way about a lot of things too. So some compassion in that is always helpful. So yeah, I think I saw, yeah, there's a hand down here.